This video will go over part 2 of chapter 8, looking more at the industry of print journalism and how that has shifted over time to adapt to digital and online journalism practices, um, and looking at current models of journalism. Now, for many years, people have predicted the death of print. It has been going on really for a long time, ever since the advent of the internet. People have been saying that newspapers were dying out. And while the newspaper industry has had many challenges, they are trying to adapt in order to prevent things like this from happening. Let's watch a quick video from Reuters about where the newspaper industry is currently as of 2019. So every year, the Readership Institute puts out a digital news report. That's the latest one from 2019. So I encourage you to look at both that and the Pew Research Center's uh, outlook on the newspaper and digital web journalism history. Now, the newspaper industry has been going through some difficult times, depending upon how you look at it, though. Print and digital circulation remains at about 28.6 million for a weekday publication as of 2018. That is a 12% decrease for print circulation, but you can see that unique visitors of newspaper websites actually has been fairly steady over the past few years. 51% of newspaper readers actually still read exclusively in print. They don't access anything online, but 93% of adults get some news online. So you can see there is a continuing shift in the newspaper industry between print forms and newer digital models. 16% of adults are willing to pay for news online. These paywalls are when you have to pay for a subscription to access some kind of news. This became popularized by the Wall Street Journal. We'll discuss it a little bit more in our third video about democracy and social issues. However, it's important to know that 18% of people around your age, 18 to 24-year-olds, pay for online news, and that actually is up from previous years. As of February 2019, New York Times has 3.3 million digital-only subscribers out of their total 4.3 million subscribers. So only 1 million of their subscribers are print, the rest are from digital. $709 million in digital revenue for New York Times, and they actually have a staff of 1,600 people working for just their digital outlet, which is a large increase from previous years. So you can see in this way, this digital newspaper model is really working for some of the larger outlets. As of 2018, 30% of all ad revenue for newspapers came from digital ads. So digital is here to stay because it helps newspapers make money. Now, in terms of what the industry looks like for employees, these numbers are from 2018 from the Pew Research Center. There were 37,000, almost 38,000 reporters, editors, and photographers working in print journalism. That's down 14% from 2014 and down 47% from 2004. So there has been a major cutback on the number of print journalists who are being hired. If you're thinking about going into journalism, you need to know how much journalists tend to make. It's $49,000 for editors and about $34,000 for the average reporter. Those salaries will, of course, shift depending upon what market you're working for, whether you're working for a national outlet or a local outlet, things of that nature. So those vary widely. These are just the median wages. The predominant worker in the newspaper industry is a white male. People of color are highly underrepresented within newsrooms overall, especially in print newsrooms. They only make up 21% of overall newsroom employees. It's a little bit higher for online-only news, but it is very low for newsroom managers. Only a little less than 19% of newsroom managers are people of color. There has been a broader push for gender equality within news. 41% of newsroom employees are women, which again is still behind where it needs to be, but a great improvement from previous years. And newsroom managers are starting to become a little more gender diverse as well. In terms of the types of newspapers, you have national newspapers. Those are your Wall Street Journal, New York Times, USA Today, those that have the largest reach. They, of course, need to cover issues that matter to the nation as a whole. Metropolitan newspapers, there's about 60 of them. Their circulation is roughly 100,000. With about 30 of those papers making up the majority of that circulation. These include Washington Post and Miami Herald, things of that nature. Medium dailies are those that are in larger metro areas that produce daily newspapers. There are about 90 of them in America with a circulation of about 50 to 100,000. And then you have your small dailies. These are in smaller locations. There are about 1,000 papers in the country with circulation under 50K. There has been a large push to weekly publications. These are those that don't produce every single day. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 days a week. We saw the Birmingham News shift to this model a few years back. There are 7,000 weekly papers in America with a circulation of over 8,000. Now, there are two different categories of newspapers. There's consensus oriented and conflict oriented. Consensus oriented tend to be local, they tend to be focused on social events, town government, crime, and zoning. These typically are smaller, non daily newspapers. The local one for our area, Shelby County Reporter. The main thing you'll notice with these consensus oriented newspapers is they're very careful not to offend advertisers. So they are great in the sense that they foster a sense of community. But the problem is because of their need for advertisers and local businesses, they tend to downplay or ignore problems of the community. Conflict-oriented newspapers, on the other hand, are those whose front page news items typically go against social norms. They're the ones that want to discuss major issues and bring them to light. They're more of a watchdog journalist. These are the national and metro dailies for the most part. They have an adversarial relationship with local politicians. They use them as sources, and politicians need the papers to get press out, but they typically act like they don't like each other. There is often representation of competing perspectives in conflict oriented, and the journalists tend to play up that conflict as a news value. You're trying to pit an idea or person against each other, and typically this is done only in a dichotomous way where only two viewpoints are presented. This is meant to provide balance and objectivity to reports, but sometimes it can underplay the complex and multifaceted nature of an issue. These conflict-oriented papers tend to avoid playing a role in community politics as well. They tend to focus more on larger issues instead. Now, a newspaper operation really focuses on the business and advertising of the newspaper, because that's really what's going to determine whether the newspaper survives. As much as journalists want to believe that they are public servants and that their job is to help the public, they still need to be thinking about news as a product, because you are selling something that people need to buy. And so without business and advertising revenue, your paper will fail. That's why papers devote half or 2/3 of their pages to ads. Ads are actually laid out first within almost every publication, and then the news articles are placed as there is room. The news hole is the space not taken up by ads. That's kind of a jargon industry term. And the larger your news hole is, the more news and stories you can put in. But the news hole overall has shrunk considerably since 2009 as newspapers are having to make more room for advertisements. Now, in terms of leadership within a newsroom and organization, the publisher and owners are the ones that maintain control over all of the paper, but they tend to not be involved on a day-to-day basis. It would be rare for a publisher or owner really to even be in the same building all of the time. The editor-in-chief is the top leader within the newsroom. They set the tone, editorial direction, and policies for the newspaper. The managing editor is going to be one step below the editor-in-chief. They manage the day-to-day operations of the newsroom, such as assigning stories and telling journalists where they need to go. They may be involved in hiring, and they are over the editors. Now, there are assistant or associate editors, and typically for every division of your paper, such as national, or maybe you have a crime division, maybe you have a political division, something like that. Each section of your paper likely has an assistant or associate editor for it. But there has been a wide sweep in the industry to eliminate more editors because they cost a lot of money. They tend, they make more money than the typical journalist. And so there has been a focus on just having one editor that their main goal is to get the story online first, update it as they need to because they either made a mistake or the story is continuing to develop. And then their third priority is getting it ready for the print publication. So you can see a big focus on digital here. Now, reporters are probably who you think of when you think of newspapers. There are different types of reporters. The overall or largest section of reporters are general assignment. They cover all types of stories. So I was a general assignment reporter and producer for broadcasting. So I never knew what story I would be covering during a day. In fact, I may cover a political story like a city council. I may cover a crime story, and I may cover a feature story about a local school, all in the same day. So you just do everything. Some reporters have a specialty or beat. A beat is when you are assigned a certain topic and that's all that you write about. However, because of employment cutbacks, there are very few beats left. It's very rare for you to be able to just be a political reporter. Most reporters now have to be general assignment. Now, there are bureau reporters who will file from other cities for larger national or even metropolitan papers, but most of these bureaus have closed due to cutbacks in budgets. Reporters for newspaper and really any industry work by themselves. They tend to go out by themselves. You can see on the right, this is actually a newspaper reporter who's having to interview someone with his iPhone so that he can get some video interviews up for the website. So this is one person carrying all of this equipment, having to do all of the work from writing, editing, taking photos. So there's really a lot that you have to do as a reporter. But the reporter is kind of the lowest person on the ladder, even though it's their name that goes on the actual article. They're really reporting back up the chain of command through those associate editors, the managing editor, editor-in-chief, and then the owner. Now, there are two kind of resources that newspapers heavily rely on. The first is wires. We talked about the Associated Press within our history video, but the New York Times, UPI, and Reuters are also other news wires available. A news wire allows daily papers, or really all publications, to pay a monthly fee to access their news. And so the newswire will collect different stories from all over and then feed it back out to the various publications. But the publications will only use a fraction of what's available based on their news hole, but it can provide you good ideas for local angles. For instance, I would always go into the health section of my newswire and look at like what new study had come out, and then I try to find someone in my local community who's affected by that, maybe talk to a UAB doctor, and now I have a local story generated from a newswire. Other journalists will use a newswire story word for word, and that's why you can see some repetitive news when you're reading through multiple publications. Another thing that newspapers rely on are feature syndicates. Unit Features and Tribune Media Services are the two most widely known feature syndicates. These are contracted by newspapers to provide work from political writers, cartoonists, comics, people who create puzzles, self-help columnists, and then those workers will sign exclusivity agreements with the publications. But it's the way that a lot of your comic book strips or your crossword puzzles will be created. Now here is a sneak peek into what an AP wire looks like. So you can see within state news, there are 27 articles that have been written. They tend to be very brief, very straightforward. I could literally cut and paste this, into my newscast or my newspaper and use it verbatim, but as a reporter, I really should be rewriting these. And you can see all the different types of news there on the left and all the different folders. So these are comics that are syndicated. It could be that, a certain owner, like maybe Hearst Publications, will contract with this particular comic, and he will create a comic, and it will be published nationwide in all of the syndicates. So that's kind of how those feature syndicates work. Same for things like Sudoku puzzles or even crossword puzzles, although the New York Times does not syndicate their particular crossword puzzle, although it is the best. I love a good New York Times crossword puzzle. Now, joint operating agreements were created in 1970 with the Newspaper Preservation Act. It was an attempt to help newspapers share business and production operations. So entire news and editorial staffs would be individually based. So you would work specifically for the Birmingham News or the Birmingham Post Herald, but your business operations, like your advertising department or your printer, would be the same. And so you're kind of sharing the business cost while maintaining separate editorial and news staffs. As of 2018, there are only 5 JOAs in existence. They were once thought to be kind of an economic savior for the print media, and unfortunately, they just weren't all that successful. So newspaper chains are those where one owner owns several papers across the country. Gannett at one time was the nation's largest chain, owning USA Today, over 880 newspapers and dozens of television stations. They recently renamed themselves Tegna, and they kept the TV and digital operations, but spun off their company where the new Gannett owns the print publications, and then Tegna owns TV. They're really all one parent company, but because of FCC regulations and ownership monopoly stuff, they have to be separate. So that's how they got around that. Readership has been declining since the Depression with the advent of radio. In the 60s and 70s, of course, network TV viewing and suburban weekly competition really pushed a lot of readers away as well. This is also a time period when women began working outside of the home, making them have less time to read newspapers overall. By 2010, circulation dropped more than 25% in just 10 years. But the overall readership for newspapers has actually increased recently thanks to online content. The average user tends to spend 2 minutes and 20 seconds on a newspaper website per visit, while for a digital-only news site, they'll spend 2 minutes, just a little bit less. Local dailies and weeklies are still doing fairly well economically. There is less advertising competition, and your community members tend to stay loyal to your particular publication. If you were living in Alabama when the Birmingham News moved from a daily to a weekly, you can maybe remember some of the uproar that there was about losing access to some of that. And it's kind of surprising that that many people were still heavily invested in a local paper, but it's a very important part of their lives. My husband actually works as a freelancer for Shelby County Reporter, and they have a very large readership. There are 640 million people who pay to read news content, both print and digital, on a daily basis. And the most growth in the paid news arena happened in Asia, Africa, and South America. Now, of course, with the advent of digital publishing, the web has given newspapers additional flexibility in their journalism. There's unlimited space for stories. So that means stories have become much longer over time. It allows for more in-depth coverage of issues, which can be very important as you're addressing very complex social issues or even political issues like we're seeing now. But the problem is that most people don't have an attention span longer than 2 minutes. So even if you write a very long, in-depth piece, the reader may not read it. Now, You are able to print more audience contributed information, such as reader letters, which we will talk about citizen journalism in video 3 a little bit more. And with the digital side of newspapers, the web story is always published first. So the race to be first to break headlines happens now on the web as opposed to in the actual print publication. It means that the web is actually updated several times a day, and there's a lot of questions in the industry about how ethical it is to continually update something without alerting readers to the change in the news story. That's something that's going to continue to work itself out as we talk about transparency in news.